Okay, Susan, you can go ahead.
All right, hello. My name is Susan Spica. I'm the Executive Director of Education Voters of Pennsylvania, and I would like to thank you all for coming tonight to this webinar, Subsidizing Cruelty, Pennsylvania's Racehorse Development Fund. So just a couple housekeeping things. If you would please stay on mute during this presentation, I'm going to talk a little about the Racehorse Development Fund. Then we will transition to our guest speaker, Patrick Battuello. And when he is done presenting, then we will open up for questions. If you have questions while you're listening to the presentation, please type them into the chat and we will definitely have time for answering your questions at the end. So I'm going to share my screen and get started with this now. Okay. So Education Voters of Pennsylvania, we are a Education Voters of Pennsylvania is a nonprofit, nonpartisan public education advocacy organization that's focused on building public demand for strong education policy and increased public involvement in the policymaking process. We're a project of the Keystone Research Center. And so you might be wondering, why is a pro-public education advocacy organization talking about horse cruelty? So in Pennsylvania, we have a grossly underfunded education system. So only 50% of eligible preschoolers are able to attend preschool because we don't have enough slots for them. In Pennsylvania ranks 44th in the nation for state share of funding for public education. So we have thousands and thousands of students who attend schools where they lack the basic and necessary resources to learn. And our college graduates graduate with some of the highest debts in the nation because our public college system is so underfunded. So we need more revenue for education. And a lot of times when we think about revenue, we think about getting new revenue, but in fact, sometimes what we need to do is just look at how we're spending money and we can find better ways to spend it. So here we are with the Pennsylvania Racehorse Development Fund. So Pennsylvania has spent $3 billion since 2005 underwriting the racehorse industry. So it is the single biggest economic incentive program in the state. It provides tens of thousands of dollars in cash payments to racehorse owners and horse breeders. It provides very few jobs, very little economic benefit. And frankly, this is a fund that very few people are aware of. No one's really paying attention to it. And so I think Ed Voters decided it was time to take a real close look at this and talk about priorities in Harrisburg. So where did this come from? The General Assembly has relied on gambling revenue to fill budget holes and to fund new initiatives. And so when Governor Wendell was our governor, he promoted casino gambling as a new source of revenue. So taxing slot machines was going to be a continuing revenue source for the government, and Pennsylvania decided to get into the game. And the horsemen, the owners, the breeders, and the trainers who run the horse tracks in Pennsylvania were very interested in this because they saw that this revenue could be a revenue stream that could support their industry. Betting was down, the horse racing industry was in decline, and they saw this as a new opportunity for them. So Act 71 of 2004 authorized casino gambling in Pennsylvania, starting with slot machines at 4 existing racetracks. Today, we have 12 casinos, 6 are standalone, 6 have racetracks affiliated with them. And right now, there are slot machines at all of them, and gambling is just it is a source of revenue that Republicans go back to the trough over and over again. Whether or not a casino is attached to a racetrack, they pay into the Horsemen's Association. So Pennsylvania imposes a 55% tax on the revenue that is generated by slot machines. So the slot machines generate about $2.4 billion in revenue for the casinos, and about $1.2 billion is paid out in the slot tax to the state. So the biggest share of this, and then the legislature decides of this pot of money, the slots tax that it takes in, where should that money go? What should it pay for? So the biggest share goes to property tax relief. Then some goes to host communities, some goes to economic development, and about 11 to 12% of slots tax revenue that comes into the state is allocated to the Racehorse Development Fund. This is about $240 million a year. So we're talking about $250 million every year. So every casino in the state pays the tax, and every casino contributes to the Racehorse Development Fund, even if it doesn't have a track. And then, so where does this money go? So when Act 71 was passed, two things happened. First, purses went up significantly. So racing was much more lucrative for the owners. The cost of running races in Pennsylvania has shifted from the live handle, which is the money that's from the wagers. It's shifted from that to the slots tax, which pays for every aspect of the horse racing. So the purses, that is the money that goes to winning horses. $152 million a year in the slots tax revenue goes into cash prizes for winning horses. Before Act 71, most of that money came from like the gambling revenue. Now 90% of it comes from slots tax dollars. About half of that money is paid out to out-of-state horse owners. So that doesn't even stay in Pennsylvania. Another 12% goes to the breeders. They just get these pots of money that they divide up among themselves as incentives. Some goes to pensions and health insurance. Drug testing, we spend $13.2 million a year in Pennsylvania on drug testing for horses, marketing, promotion. So, I mean, tax dollars fund every single aspect of the racing industry. And what we found, we have a report that was written by Sharon Ward that we have up on a website. We found very little public benefit from this investment. So there are very few jobs. It's a very, very small share of the agricultural economy, and it's only 1/3 of the equine industry. So if you own a racehorse, you get a subsidy from the state. But if you own a show horse, or if you own just a hobby horse that you just keep in your backyard or in your land, you don't get a tax subsidy. So when we hear the argument that horse racing creates jobs, that it's a huge part of the agricultural economy, that really just isn't true. Public has very little interest in horse racing. It has been declining for years. Pre-pandemic, the horse tracks averaged about 736 visitors per race a day, compared to like a minor league baseball team that would have 5,000 people come to a game. And then here's kind of what we're going to talk about today. This is not, there's this misperception that horse breeders and trainers and owners are people who just love their horses, and so that it's like really not nice for us to like pick on them and go after them. But this just is unfortunately not the reality. We're operating in a system where horses are a commodity. They have a useful life. When they get injured, they're euthanized. When they fail to produce, they're sold off. Some of them become meat. It's not a good situation for horses. In 2019, there were 119 dead horses at Pennsylvania racetracks. 59 died at the Parks racetrack alone. It was the most horse deaths at any track in the nation that year. So I guess what's the solution? It is time for the horse racing industry in Pennsylvania to become self-sufficient. They have received $3 billion in government subsidies, and it's time for them to stand on their own 2 feet. So we are advocating to repeal the law and reallocate these funds to invest in Pennsylvania's future, invest in our children so that we can have a bright future. So if you want more information, we have a long report and a short report at kidsoverhorseracing.org. And if you would like to contact me, I'll put my contact information in the chat, or you can go to edvoters at educationvoterspa.org. And I am now going to introduce Patrick with a short video clip, because we are very lucky to have him with us. I will play the video, and then we will move on to having Patrick kind of introduce himself and give a little bit more background about himself.
Welcome to Real Sport. Racehorses have been dying at alarming rates on American tracks for a while now. And at long last, it seems the public is beginning to demand accountability.
Horse racing resembles no other accepted sport on the planet.
Another horse has died at California's famed Santa Anita racetrack. It's the 23rd horse to die at the park since Christmas time.
What happened to those horses at Santa Anita is just the tip of an iceberg the public knows virtually nothing about.
We have documented over 5,000 confirmed kills on U.S. tracks just since 2014. We estimate that over 2,000 horses are killed racing or training across America every year.
I would venture to say that people watching us right now would be shocked by that number.
They should be sickened by that number.
The number of thoroughbreds in this country who are chewed up and spit out each year by the so-called sport of kings is surprising, alarming, and flat out disgusting.
So I am now going to turn this presentation over to Patrick, and I just want to say thank you, Patrick, for taking the time to come and talk to us. You are really the national expert on this topic, and we're very lucky to have you here. So
thank you.
Without further ado, Patrick.
Thank you, Susan. My name is Patrick Battuello. I am the founder and president of Horse Racing Wrongs. We are the only nonprofit in the nation that is clearly and consistently working to end horse racing. I'd like to begin with the basic question. What is horse racing? Is it a sport as it has been so brilliantly marketed by the industry for over 150 years? Is it entertainment as presented by NBC each spring? Is it but a fun, harmless way to gamble as the track owners would have us believe? Is it mint juleps, fancy hats, bugle calls, and my old Kentucky home? Is it the grace and majesty of thoroughbreds in full stride, equine athletes plying their craft, the spirit of competition? Of course, it is none of these. In truth, horse racing is but an archaic, largely non-viable gambling business that exploits, abuses, and kills sentient beings as a matter of course. In other words, it cannot be fixed or reformed. In other words, it is wrong from the start. To begin, and what for me is the worst of it, unremitting confinement and isolation. The typical racehorse is kept locked, alone, in a tiny 12 by 12 stall for over 23 hours a day, making a mockery of the industry claim that horses are born to run, love to run, and a cruelty all the worse for being inflicted upon naturally social, herd-oriented animals like horses. As anyone who has ever had a horse or been around horses can attest to this social nature. Just last year, before the New York State Senate, at a hearing at which I also testified, prominent equine veterinarian Dr. Craig Kulikowski likened this cruelty to keeping a child locked in a 4x4 closet for over 23 hours a day. If that doesn't bring it home, I don't know what will. Horse racing is control and subjugation. It is lip tattoos, cribbing collars, nose chains, mouth bits, tongue ties, lip chains, and of course, the ubiquitous whips. Horse racing is commodification. In the eyes of the law, racehorses are literal chattel, things to be bought, sold, traded, and dumped whenever and however their people decide. To make matters worse, they are not even afforded the protection, woefully inadequate as most are, of animal cruelty statutes, meaning a trainer or owner can grind his horse into the ground, yes, even to death, with virtual impunity. What's more, the average racehorse will change hands several times over the course of his so-called career, adding anxiety and stress to an already anxious, stressful existence. Horse racing is negation. Practically all the horse's natural instincts and desires are thwarted, creating an emotional and mental suffering that is brought home with crystal clarity in the stereotypies and vices commonly displayed by confined racehorses. Things like cribbing or air sucking, bobbing, weaving, pacing, kicking, digging, even self-mutilation. Says world-renowned animal behaviorist and retired Tufts professor, Dr. Nicholas Dodman, and I quote, "Racehorses with long periods of confinement and isolation and exhibit an unusually high prevalence of stereotypies. The suffering can be described by referencing the suffering of people in solitary confinement. A recently released man who had spent years in solitary said he sometimes felt anxiety, paranoia, panic, hallucinations. The only way he could help suppress this dysphoria was to walk back and forth in his cell until the line he walked was soaked in his sweat. And again, that's how Dr. Dodman contextualizes the suffering of confined racehorses. And of course, horse racing is killing. Through our unprecedented FOIA reporting, horse racing wrongs is documented with names, dates, locations, over 6,000 confirmed kills on US tracks just since 2014. We estimate that over 2,000 horses are killed racing or training across America every year, over 2,000. And just to be clear, death on the track is neither clean nor tranquil. Death on the track is cardiovascular collapse or failed hearts. This, mind you, to animals who are mostly still in puberty. Death on the track is pulmonary hemorrhage or bleeding out from the lungs. Death on the track is blunt force head trauma from collisions with other horses or the track itself. Death on the track is broken necks, severed spines, ruptured ligaments, and shattered legs, occasionally shattered so severely that the limb remains attached to the rest of the body by skin or tendons only. Often transport is impossible, so the horse must wait in pain, in terror, for the vet to arrive with the pink solution that will end his life. One such horse was Heelbolt, who broke down in a 2009 race at Fairgrounds in Louisiana. An ESPN writer followed the track vet as she went about her work. He wrote, Heelbolt's eyes, once coldly fixed on the track, are teary and dilated. His breathing, once quick, has quickened even more. His coat, once shiny from the pumping of oil and sweat glands, has dulled. Out comes the pink, the euthanasia solution. The vet strokes his neck to say goodbye, then puts her left index finger on his jugular and presses down, swelling the vein. She drives the needle straight into his jugular, piercing his sweaty, leathery skin, and depresses the large plunger with her thumb, pushing in the poison, darkening the pink as it mixes with blood. After it empties, she draws out the needle and repeats the motion with the second syringe. Heelbolt falls under the railing, landing shoulder first, his nose in the dirt. He blinks rapidly for 10 seconds or so until his eyes, once beautifully alert, are blank. As his fellow horses, having just finished the race, jog by, his life is measured in shallow breaths until he is no longer breathing, until he is just 1,200 pounds of expired muscle, his bloody, shattered leg hooked on a railing. He concludes, "It's hard to know what a peaceful death looks like, but this isn't it." From 2017 to 2019, 322 horses died at Pennsylvania tracks. 322, that's over 100 every year. But these, mind you, are only the ones that I could confirm through FOIA requests. Surely there were more injured on the track who were euthanized back on private property. Those horses were not reported to the state. Still more were euthanized after being acquired by a rescue. In fact, Joanne Normile, founder of two of the most famous rescues in the country, estimated that some 30% of the horses she was taking in off the backsides of tracks had to be euthanized because their bodies were too far gone. Again, the numbers would not reflect those. In addition, there are private training facilities in Pennsylvania, as there are across the country. Horses are breaking down there and dying in utter anonymity. So keep in mind that 322, that 100 per year in Pennsylvania, is an understatement of the true death toll on Commonwealth tracks. To more personalize this killing, I'd like to share with you some of the information I received from the Pennsylvania Department of Agriculture just this year. There are about a dozen or so horses that I'd like to talk about. And while the details may be a bit uncomfortable to sit through, I think it is absolutely crucial that people understand how these horses are dying. So please bear with me. Caught by surprise was killed at Penn National Training on January 10th. Quote, complete fracture of the humerus, multiple small fragments of bone, severe soft tissue damage, and hemorrhage. Stella B, killed at Parks on January 28th, severely comminuted fractures with numerous small bone fragments into the cartilage, also severe chronic stomach ulcers. By the way, research indicates that 90 to 95% of all racehorses suffer from ulcers. Tiki Thomas, killed at Penn National February 8th, multiple fractures, one into more than 25 fragments. Homeboy was killed at Parks on February 18th, severely comminuted fractures with numerous missing and displaced bone fragments, one protruding through the skin. Also, chronic traumatic arthritis and stomach has extensive ulcers. Homeboy was but 3 years old, still in puberty. Better Song, killed at the Meadows on February 22nd, a harness track, simply says, quote, sudden death, artery rupture. Proud Supporter, killed at Parks February 24th, severe acute comminuted displaced pelvis fracture with extensive hemorrhage and soft tissue trauma. Diva Drama, killed at Parks on March 2nd, thoracic vertebral fracture with spinal cord compression, acute hemorrhage, chronic traumatic arthritis, stomach ulcers, cartilage erosions. Diva Drama also was just 3 years old. Play Me a Memory, killed at Parks March 18th, severe open fracture with bone fragments protruding through the skin and dirt embedded in the wound. Midday Prayer, killed at Parks on March 24th, quote, this horse was found dead in her stall, cecal rupture. Autobahn Express, killed at Parks on June 13th, collision with another horse, numerous comminuted displaced vertebral fractures, multiple fragments, and also fractured ribs. Huntington Drive, killed at Penn, June 24th, multiple fractures, torn ligament, severe arthritis of most appendicular joints, severe widespread chronic gastric ulceration, and multiple cartilage erosions. Blissful Breeze, June 27th at Parks, multiple catastrophic fractures with extensive soft tissue damage, ligaments completely ruptured. And finally, Bucky Be Lucky, killed at Parks on June 29th, multiple severe fractures with detached fragments and free-floating bone gravel. Again, that's just a sampling of the hundreds and hundreds of death reports I receive from state racing commissions each year. That number 2,000, the number of horses killed racing or training, tells but a part of the story. Each year, hundreds more are dying back in their stalls from things like colic, a painful, terrifying abdominal condition, laminitis, excruciating inflammation in the feet, the proverbial complication after surgery, infection, barn accident, or simply, quote, found dead in the morning. These, mind you, are still very much active racehorses, awaiting their next races, and most of them still in puberty. They are unequivocally casualties of the racing industry, just the same as if they had snapped legs out on the track. Then to slaughter. While it is impossible to know the exact number of discarded racehorses going to slaughter each year, we do know the number of American horses in total going to slaughter. We get that information from the USDA. As an aside, the last equine slaughterhouses on US soil closed in 2007. Now we simply ship them, itself a horror, to Canada and Mexico. In 2018, the last year for which we have full data, 97,000 American horses were shipped to slaughterhouses north and south of our border. 2 independent studies put the thoroughbred portion of the overall total between 16 and 19%. Do the math. That translates to roughly 15,000 American thoroughbreds slaughtered in 2018. And even as the industry desperately tries to downplay the extent of the problem by touting its utterly hollow zero tolerance policies and drop in the bucket aftercare initiatives, Alex Waldrop, president of the National Thoroughbred Racing Association, recently told USA Today that 7,500 American thoroughbreds are being slaughtered annually. Now, we know that that number is grossly understated, but let's take a moment and contemplate what was said and who said it. Here we have one of the most powerful executives in American horse racing freely admitting that each year, multiple thousands of his industry's supposedly beloved athletes, these so-called members of the family, are being killed in the most horrific of ways. An industry-linked vet puts the number between 10 and 12,000. Whatever estimate we decide to use, the conclusion is as clear as day. The majority of spent or simply no longer wanted thoroughbred racehorses are landing in equine hell, the slaughterhouse, at the end of their so-called careers. The fact is, the horse racing industry needs slaughter. In a recent article in Horse Race Insider, a pro racing publication, the writer Mark Berner admitted the following. He says, the Jockey Club will not support a slaughter-free industry because it will cost $120 million per year to fund the care of the 20,000 plus horses bred each year. Again, the Jockey Club, the most prominent and influential organization in US racing, will not support a slaughter-free industry. And for proof, we need look no further than its refusal to endorse the SAFE Act, a bill that would effectively end the slaughter of American horses because it would cost too much to care for those horses. It practically leaves one speechless. But beyond that vileness, there is truth. Extended out, that cost becomes even more staggering. An average 5-year career, an average 25-year lifespan, and an average $5,000 annual cost of care means that in order for the industry to guarantee a lifelong safe landing for each and every member of this year's foal crop, it would need to come up with some $2 billion. That's $2 billion with a B. And that would just be for this year's foal crop. The same would be needed next year and the year after that and the year after that. In short, the horse racing industry is deliberately creating thousands of horses each year for which it has neither the desire nor the ability to care for post-exploitation at the racetrack, hence slaughter. And this is just thoroughbreds, mind you. Multiple thousands more erstwhile standardbred and quarter horse athletes meet the same brutal end. And what is that brutal end? Sold at auction to kill buyers, transported to holding pens, and ultimately shipped hundreds, if not thousands of miles in cramped trailers where the USDA has determined they can go up to 36 hours without food, water, or rest. Their final destination is a cold, concrete abattoir. Here, amid the terrifying sights, sounds, and smells of death, they will be shot, either with a .22 caliber rifle or a retractable metal bolt to the brain. But often this takes multiple tries as the panic flight-inclined equines make difficult targets, a fact exacerbated by floors made slippery with blood. They will then be shackled by their hind legs, hoisted and hung upside down, slashed through their carotid arteries, bled out, yes, occasionally while still conscious, and finally butchered for their meat. The whimsical names and cheering crowds a bitter lifetime ago. Of this final betrayal, Twyla Francois, a Canadian horse slaughter expert, said it best, and I quote, "They are so frightened. You can see them in the auction ring, searching, looking for a friendly face. We see this at the slaughterhouses too, where they're still seeking out affection from even the slaughterhouse workers themselves. And one thing we saw that really broke my heart was the workers walking by the pens, and the horses would rush up, looking for comfort from these men who are going to kill them. Nothing can prepare them for the journey they have ahead after they've been given up." All this, the snapped cannon bones and shredded suspensory ligaments of race day, the sudden cardiac events and exercise-induced pulmonary hemorrhages in morning practice, the colic, laminitis found dead, and the exsanguinations, leads to a single inescapable conclusion. The American horse racing industry is engaged in wholesale carnage, not hyperbole, carnage. Sensibilities toward animal exploitation, especially regarding animal entertainment, are rapidly evolving. In just the past few years, Ringling Brothers has closed its doors for good, ending over a century of animal abuse. SeaWorld, after being exposed by the film Blackfish, has ended its captive breeding program for orcas and remains in slow, steady decline. The National Aquarium has vowed to release all of its remaining captive dolphins to a seaside sanctuary. There are rodeo bans in cities as diverse as Pittsburgh, San Francisco, and Fort Wayne, Indiana. It is now illegal to use elephants for any form of entertainment in New York and Illinois. And New Jersey, Hawaii, and California have forbidden all wild animal acts. And perhaps most relevant to the issue at hand, in 2018, Florida, which, as we all know, is a state that remains perpetually deadlocked on almost every other issue, voted overwhelmingly by over 2-1 to ban greyhound racing in that state, leaving but 5 active dog tracks in the entire country, leaving dog racing in America all but dead. In fact, dog racing is outright prohibited on moral grounds in 41 of the 50 states. So the question becomes, why should horse racing be exempt? Especially when the scale of the killing and the depth of the suffering dwarfs all those other industries, as bad as they were and are combined. Horse racing a sport? If so, then that word must be redefined, for the competitive racing of horses resembles no other accepted sport on the planet. In what other sport are the bodies of adolescent athletes pounded into the ground without remorse? In what other sport are the athletes kept in intensive solitary confinement for over 23 hours a day? In what other sport are the athletes deemed literal chattel? In what other sport are the athletes drugged and doped without consent? In what other sport are the athletes whipped, beaten for motivation? In what other sport are the athletes routinely dying on the playing field and after having the rest of the day's festivities continue? And in what other sport are the athletes violently bled out and butchered upon retirement? Horse racing a sport? If not for the gravity involved, it would be absurd. We live in 21st century America. We can, we should, we must be better than this. Thank you.
Thank you, Patrick. That left me kind of speechless. And I guess I just want to go back to the fact that in Pennsylvania, we have such a robust horse racing industry only because taxpayers are subsidizing every piece of this industry from the top to the bottom, and the vast majority of this funding is going directly into the pockets of the people who are breeding these horses, in most cases, wealthy people who have horse racing as a hobby. And this is what we're spending money on when we have other just vast needs that should be funded. So I will now open this up to questions, and I would like to say we are building a budget coalition and a coalition of allies around ending the horse racing subsidy as we look forward to 2021. We're in the middle of a pandemic. We have seen small businesses shut down. We have seen schools that are underfunded. In any place that you look in our state economy, the economic downturn has had a very substantial impact. And as we look forward, it is going to be time for the state lawmakers in Harrisburg to really share with the public what their budget priorities are. And we are going to be saying very loudly and very clearly with a large coalition that it is time for them to not have subsidizing the racing industry as their priority. So when this is over, if you registered for the webinar, I will email you more information about how to connect with us so that we can continue this work together. But I would like to open this up for questions. And so I see a question in here from Robin, and I'm just going to read it out loud. It says, is there no federal agency whose responsibility is to prevent this? Can we join PETA petitions? How do we build a national coalition of several organizations to demand to end horse racing? Would you like to take that, Patrick?
Yeah, sure. So there is unfortunately, we are the only nonprofit, as I said, that's clearly and consistently working to end horse racing. There are other groups that have been working, for some reform initiatives. Personally, after what I've just said, I think that this is beyond fixing and reforming. It is my opinion that like I said at the top, it's wrong from the start. So what's needed is, especially in subsidy states like Pennsylvania, is unrelenting pressure on legislators. Most legislators are unaware of these subsidies, believe it or not. These were enacted, 15, 20 years ago. And it was an easy vote for politicians back then because there were no animal rights groups, really sounding the alarm, like we are now. And when the horse racing industry would come to legislators and say, look, we need some help here. We can't compete with casinos and lotteries. You gotta help prop us up here. Otherwise, there's so many jobs are going to be lost. It was an easy vote. Well, now as time has gone on, it's clear that this industry is in decline. All the metrics are down. The foal crop, which is the obscene term for the number of new thoroughbreds coming into the system, is half of what it was 30 years ago. All the other numbers, handle, attendance, number of races, race days, etc., are down. So clearly this industry is in decline. And, as you guys are doing in Pennsylvania, this money should be put to much better use in propping up a dying industry that is in the process killing horses. So I think it has to be done state by state. I think that what you're doing in Pennsylvania is really the template, pressuring politicians and saying enough of this. And I have no doubt, and the industry would be the first to admit, that if the subsidies are pulled from Pennsylvania horse racing, it will die practically overnight. As you mentioned at the top, 90% of the purse money is coming from slots machines. It will not survive. So that's the quickest, most efficient way to end this terrible cruelty.
We had a question from Mark that I think Sharon can answer, just in case everybody didn't see the question and answer in the chat. Are the subsidies for purses configured by a designated earmark in excess of the amounts paid out? Is the purse fund growing annually with unused funds rolling over to the following year? So I will just present Sharon Ward to everyone, who is the author of the report that you can find at kidsoverhorseracing.org. She's really dug into this and kind of really created the first comprehensive report about the Racehorse Development Fund that's ever been created. And so she's our expert here. So I think I'll let her answer that question. So I think you need to unmute.
There we go. Thank you. Thanks very much, Susan. Thanks, Patrick. So the key to all of this is that Pennsylvania tax dollars, your tax dollars, are going to support this industry. And the way it works, as Susan indicated, is there's a 55% slot tax. About between 11 and 12% of it goes on an annual basis to the various components, and those dollars are spent. There may be small surpluses from year to year, but as a general rule, what comes in is then distributed in purse money at each one of the racetracks. So the impact is incredible. For a winning horse that would normally get a $27,000 purse, which is pretty good for a horse for one race, with all of the subsidies that are provided, that horse can, and bonuses that go to owners and to breeders, that horse can bring in $57,000. So it's very, very lucrative for the owners, and you're paying those dollars. Let's stop there.
Thank you. I'm reading through the comments here. I'm sorry. What can individuals do to get involved? What's the best way to be heard and support the cause? So we are building a coalition of people people and organizations that are going to be calling for an end to the Racehorse Development Fund and a reallocation of this funding to better purposes. And so if you are on the, you can go to kidsoverhorseracing.org and find our report. And then I also posted in the chat a page that we have started where we are going to, it's the Coalition to Stop Racing Subsidies. So it's in the chat, you can find stopracingsubsidiespa.org and you can sign up there. And then we can keep you in the loop about the work that we're doing in Pennsylvania. And I saw a longer question about, do we have a generated report that will spell out things like this money could hire so many teachers and it could provide seats to students. We do have a really extensive report, and I think we're working on other advocacy materials around that, and those are some good suggestions to make sure that.
Can I jump in on what people can do?
Yep.
So, you know, again, those are all great ideas. If your concern is, you know, from the animal welfare perspective, certainly join a protest. We at Horse Racing Wrongs have sponsored protests in over 20 states. We have all the materials that we ship out for free. So if there's not a protest at one of your tracks, and I know that we have organized at both Penn and Parks, but if there's not something going on in at a track near you, including the harness tracks, then, you know, contact us and we will get all the materials out to you and we will support you. That is the best way. You know, every great social justice movement in our nation's history has started with protests in the streets, and this is no different. So, but also, again, going back to, you know, pressuring politicians, the subsidies, again, just pressuring politicians to defund this industry would be the most direct way, you know, to end it. And also, you know, writing the simple thing like writing a letter to the editor. In fact, the Philadelphia Inquirer has written 2 editorials decrying the subsidies. So it's already out there. It's a question of applying that pressure, that unrelenting pressure.
And the other thing you can do is tomorrow, if you're still feeling like really horrified by this, find your state lawmakers, find your state senator, find your state representative, and sit down and either write a paper letter, like write a handwritten letter, type it up on a computer and drop it in the mail to their offices, because those definitely get read, and just say, hey, this is my name, I'm your constituent, this is where I live, and I have just learned about this, and I would like to know what your position is on the Racehorse Development Fund, and start a conversation with your lawmaker about this issue and build a relationship and try to find out where your lawmaker stands on this, because it is, I think there are 2 issues. I think one issue is a lot of lawmakers don't really understand this fund. They're not really told about it, but then the horsemen have a lot of money, and the horsemen really go into Harrisburg. They hire a lot of very high-priced, powerful lobbyists who go in. They help fund races. So some candidates are funded by the horsemen, and they're kind of, you know, beholden to them. And then others, I think, are scared of the horsemen, scared that if they stand up to the horsemen might run somebody against them. And so hearing from their constituents directly is a very, very powerful thing with lawmakers. And I don't think that lawmakers are necessarily like pro Racehorse Development Fund. I think they've never really had the opportunity to have a conversation about this. And I think that you can help start that conversation with your own lawmakers. So if you don't know your lawmakers, just Google, find your legislator PA. It'll pop up on your computer screen. You type in your address, and then it'll tell you where your legislators are. And I tell you, a really good way, I think, is to like type up a letter and actually drop it in the mail to their district offices. That will get their attention. If you could also email them or call their office and ask to, you know, have a phone meeting, but that will get their attention. So it says, it was mentioned these funds come from Tom McNiff, I should say, it was mentioned that these funds come from an endowment or grant funding. Is it all from taxpayers? This is all from a tax on slots revenue. So this is all taxpayer funded. So from Susan Zolank, it says, will this information be released to media outlets and local TV stations in Pennsylvania? I think for the most part, the general public is not aware of it, and that would be informative. So we did send out press advisories around the state to press, and we're working to get interest in this. So yes, we will be continuing to reach out to the press. And I think Patrick's point is a good one. When we're post-pandemic, I think a good way to get attention is to gather and to be part of some kinds of actions that will draw attention to this issue. From John Scheib, people seem to trust the veterinarians that protect these horses. Can you discuss how the trainers are making the medical decisions and how wrong that is?
Yeah, sure. So the it's a badly kept secret that trainers determine what drugs their horses get rather than the vets themselves, which is an ethical an ethical abdication from the veterinarians. So look, it's a dirty business. They're making a lot of money, the vets, with these these scripts that they write, and I think that like a Lasix injection, they get like $100, each time they do it. So, and that's not to say that all veterinarians are corrupt, but I think that the rule is that trainers run the show, not the vets. And again, that's unethical, right off the top.
Thank you. I have a question here from Margaret Halley. With COVID here, the grandstands, I believe, are empty. Do you know how people are making bets?
Yeah, everything is, being done electronically now, through your phones and computers. And so it's easy. And of course, they were patting themselves on the back, in the early months of the pandemic because their handle was way up, the amount of money that was being bet. Well, that's because they were the only game in town. All of the sports had shut down. Casinos, most important, were shut down also. So yeah, of course their handle was going to go up. So yeah, in 2020, it's easy to place a bet. Where you don't have to physically be at the racetrack. But on a more optimistic note, with the advent of all sports betting, where people are going to be able to legally bet on football, basketball, and baseball, rather than just in Nevada and New Jersey, we're going to see, much more competition against horse racing. And, again, when you look at this, the trend and where it's been heading for some 30 years, it's only going to get worse. And in addition, the demographics are very poor for the horse racing industry. So the typical, hardened horse player, as they're called, these are the longtime bettors, is a 60, 65-year-old man. They're not attracting, the 20 somethings, for two reasons. One, it's more complicated to learn how to, handicap a horse race. But in addition, as I said in the talk, sensibilities are changing. And so these 20 somethings, even though they may not be vegan or an animal rights activist, they've grown up with a different attitude toward animal exploitation. And they've looked at this and they say, well, geez, why are we whipping horses, to place a bet? Why can't we just go to a casino or, bet on a football game, with consenting human beings? So long-term, the demographics are very, very bad, for the horse racing industry.
Thank you. We have another question from Tom McNiff. It said, how about limiting breeding in some form if they do not cut back funds for horse racing? Is that possible? Or are there some other provisions for these trainers against doping?
Yeah, well, as far as the first part, the breeding is just a function of supply and demand. So, as tracks close, and I'd like to point out that since 2000, and we have this on our website, there has been a net loss of 36 racetracks in the United States. So in that time, I believe 38 tracks have closed, only 2 new ones have opened, and the ones that have opened are racinos, these subsidized racetracks. So they're not opening new tracks, that can stand alone. So the industry is already contracting, and as the industry contracts, the breeders are going to breed less horses. It's just it's common economic sense. And like I mentioned, the foal crop is half of what it was, back in 1990. So, and what was the second part about doping?
Yeah, are there provisions for trainers against doping?
There are rules and regulations in every state, and we don't focus too much on the drugging and doping. You know, yes, of course, it's a wrong, but it's just one of many wrongs. And my big issue with it is it implies that this can be cleaned up. It's kind of like baseball during the steroid era. You know, it just needs a good house cleaning. And if we could just get the doping and drugging under control and put everything under one national governing body, that things could be made right with horse racing, and nothing could be further from the truth. They're not going to release these horses from that solitary confinement. It's not going to even touch slaughter, and it's not going to have any significant impact on the number of horses being killed. And this is something that most of the public misses and most of the media misses. And I've been pointing this out for years. The killing is built into the system. It's inherent to what they do, starting with the way these horses are bred. They're bred with big torsos, spindly legs, fragile ankles. It's all about speed. So they're not built sturdy, or you're bred to be sturdy. But also when they're first put to work. So the average the average horse does not fully mature until 6. So his bones aren't done growing, his plates aren't done fusing until 6 years old. The average racehorse is thrust into intensive training at 18 months and raced at 2, which is the rough equivalent of a 6-year-old child. So clearly, you know, we're talking about animals. In fact, they actually have their baby teeth when they're first being raced. And it's that grinding, that repetitive grinding. When I was talking about some of those horses, that chronic arthritis for 3-year-old horses, you know, this is that wear and tear, and they're just, you know, slowly but surely, you know, breaking down. So it should come as no surprise when they do ultimately break down and have to be euthanized. So in addition, what they're being forced to do on the track bears no resemblance to what happens to a wild horse in the fields. You know, at the track, they're being forced to run at a breakneck speed to keep up with some artificial herd in an unnatural way, always counterclockwise, you know, with whip wielding humans atop. So all of these things combined, you know, leads to what I call the inevitability of dead racehorses. So I just ask people to disregard all this talk about reform and Mitch McConnell's, you know, Horse Racing Integrity and Safety Act. It's just a big, massive ruse. You know, this is built in. The killing has and will continue. My numbers, they don't change. Even after all this bad publicity from Santa Anita last year, you know, here we are in New York. You know, Belmont is at 50 dead horses in 2020. Belmont, which is one of the top, you know, 3 or 4 tracks in the country. Nothing changes because the killing is built in.
Thank you. I think we're about toward the end. If you have any final question, you should please put it in the chat. We had Karen just made a comment. Many people see the Humane Society or PETA working on improving horse racing. They want reforms and want the industry to continue. I'm not sure what that meant.
Well,
so John,
you know, the Humane Society of the United States, the HSUS, is not philosophically opposed to horse racing, and people should know that. So if you're donating money to the HSUS because you care about animals and you care about horses, then you should reconsider, because they are not out to end horse racing. They want to reform it, but they have said publicly, right at the top, Wayne Pacelli, Kitty Block, the current president, we are not against horse racing. And so as far as PETA, you know, I've had my issues with their messaging over the years. I do believe that ultimately PETA would like to see horse racing disappear. You know, but again, what I said is true. We are the only nonprofit clearly and consistently working to end horse racing.
So unless there's one, thank you. I'm glad that you understood the question that I did not understand. Sure. And so I'm going to have one final comment here, unless there's another question that pops up. It seems the industry claims jobs as justification for subsidies, yet all industries create jobs and economic impact and get no subsidies. How is that fair? And they talk about protecting farms and agriculture, but these farms are forcing mares to breed against their will so they can use them as gambling tools. Let's not confuse them with those that are growing food to support their community. And so I think, I don't know, Sharon, if you just want to hop in and just a final comment about like this whole idea that this is some big agriculture piece when really it is about gambling. So,
I'm here. Yeah, thanks,
There.
Susan. Here in Pennsylvania and across the country, the gambling industry presents itself, and the face of it is agriculture. This is not about agriculture. It is not about producing food. It's not about growing plants. It is about gambling. And what they are doing is taking these animals and using them for gambling purposes, and that's the bottom line here. This is not a large. I mean, Pennsylvania is a very large agricultural state. This is a tiny piece of Pennsylvania's agriculture by virtually any measure. In Pennsylvania, the number of milk cows is 50 times the number of horses in general. There are not very many jobs at the track. We found about 1,700 full-time jobs. And just for comparison purposes, overall for everything, there are about 10,000 racetrack jobs, and they get a subsidy of more than $200 million a year. Pennsylvania's tourism industry generates about 310,000 jobs per year, and they have direct support from the Commonwealth of about $18 million. So the amount of taxpayer dollars going to this industry is way outsized for the economic benefits or really any impact or public interest. It's throwing money. It's investing Pennsylvania's money in the past rather than investing it in the future. And there are a variety of ways that these dollars can be spent to support education, to create real jobs, and to help position Pennsylvania for the future. So this is not, horse breeding and horse racing are not they're not high priority occupations in Pennsylvania. They are not Pennsylvania's future. These funds exist because of the tremendous power of the horsemen's organizations. And think about it, if you could get, some of the breeders will earn hundreds of thousands of dollars a year from taxpayers for breeding horses, in addition to what they're being paid by the horse owners. So the people who benefit financially are very anxious to hang on to these dollars. And we are simply asking whether this is worth the investment. And if Pennsylvania taxpayers knew the impact on horses of this industry, would we really want to continue to make this investment? And I think that's the question to pose to lawmakers. And we encourage you to do that.
In addition, Susan, if I may jump in, these tracks are all sitting on valuable property. And we've got a page on the website, what these tracks that have closed are being redeveloped into or have been redeveloped into. All kinds of jobs are being created in the wake of horse racing tracks closing and changing into, valuable, commercial, retail, housing. Again, if you go to the website, the redevelopment of shuttered racetracks is where you can find the information. Just to give you an example, out in California, Hollywood Park, which closed about 7 years ago, has a casino, a full service casino on site. In addition, it's got, retail, office space, and it's now going to be the future home of the Rams and the Chargers in the NFL. So, clearly, as one door closes, another one opens. So the jobs argument just doesn't work. There will be jobs created with these tracks closing and being redeveloped.
Yep. Thank you. Thank you. So on that note, I am going to just thank everyone for attending. We've reached 8:02, and I thank everybody for hanging in here. We've kept basically everyone on for the whole hour. So you will be getting an email from me either tomorrow or the day after that once we have a video recording of this, so I can send you a link to the video, and then I'll also send you links to the websites and a place to find your legislators. And I very most strongly encourage you to sit down and write a letter to your lawmaker, share how you feel, ask your lawmaker how he or she feels, and ask for a response and try to start a dialogue about this, because I think that's how we're going to start to chip away at this is kind of one contact at a time until we get enough people contacting lawmakers where they decide that they're going to do something about this and that they know enough. So thank you all for joining us. I really look forward to following up with everybody. I'm very grateful that you took a time out of your lives. And I just want to say thank you to Patrick, both for all of the work that you do that is really, really difficult work, but also for just very clearly being able to articulate to us what this industry is really about. So thank you. And I hope everyone will have a good rest of your evening.
Thank you, Susan.
Yep, thank you. Bye.
Bye.